I'm just gonna wait for that live to kick in here. Okay, so here we are. Very pleased to have Bhakti Abhay Ashram Marsh as our guest for the Sadhaka interviews series. And I've known Bhakti Abhay Ashram Marsh for maybe about 17 years now. He started coming around to Audarya just a year after I joined in 2005. And we've done some crazy things in the jungles together also in Costa Rica and things like that. So this should be an interesting interview. Of course, Bhakti Abhay Ashram Marsh has a wealth of experience and wisdom in the realm of bhakti from the many 50 plus years of being a devotee. And we're very happy to kind of, how would you say it, tap into that source or that wisdom. So let me get started with a little bio of Ashram Maharaj. So Swami B.A. Ashram has been practicing bhakti yoga since May 1969, when he met Srila Prabhupada's disciples in Hawaii. He accepted the renounced order of sannyas in 2012. During 40 years of household life, along with performing a variety of services for the Krishna Consciousness movement, he taught English at colleges and universities in California, Hawaii, and Florida for about 25 years. He has taught bhakti yoga throughout the Hawaiian Islands, across the United States, in Central America, and Poland. He is currently based in Honolulu, Hawaii. Okay, so let's get started. I've jotted down some questions here, and I asked people to send their own questions in if they had any. And I got some from a few devotees, which is nice to have that beforehand so that I don't have to, do it live, so to speak. So it's nice to be a little prepared. But I was interviewing Gokul Chandra about a month and a half ago, and I started with the same question, which I think kind of kicks the whole interview in the right gear from the get-go, and that is, Ashram Maharaj, can you remember like the first religious or spiritual experience that you had, and what was it like?
Oh, I saw that question, and all of a sudden I find it. The first religious or spiritual experience that I can remember was probably just going to church regularly as a little boy. My family nominally was Methodist. My great-great-grandfather was one of the founders of this town on the central coast of California, Lompoc. So I'm fifth generation Lompocan. And the town was founded as a temperance colony, which tells you a little bit about probably the kind of Methodists my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents were. And because we were a pioneer family, a prominent family in town, when we lived in Lompoc, even though my dad was an agnostic, probably from the age of 18, I think what did it for him and God was when right after joining the Navy, just before World War II started, his first assignment in the Navy out of basic training was as a photographer, documenting the recovery efforts at Pearl Harbor. So he was an 18-year-old kid from a dairy farm in California, watching them haul the bodies of 18, 19, 20-year-old farm boys out of the wrecks of their ships. And that was it for him and God. But because of our family, we went to church. I went to Sunday school. But when we moved away from Lompoc, starting at the age of 9, I was actually the only person in my immediate family who went to church regularly. So I always had an affinity for understanding God as far as I can remember. I do remember when we still lived in Lompoc, we would have our minister over for dinner fairly regularly. His name was Mr. McGee. And one evening after dinner, we were sitting in the living room. I guess the grown-ups were having their coffee, and I was sitting on the couch with Mr. McGee. And he asked me if I had any questions. So I had two questions. What is God like? 6 or 7 years old. What is God like, and what are we supposed to do? We're here. What are we supposed to do with that? He was a little shocked and didn't have any answers. He didn't really have any answers that I remember. So I think I was kind of always sort of chasing after those answers. I don't remember like one. I always need to counter that. I have a counter story to that in case anyone thinks I might have been too spiritually precocious. On another occasion, perhaps a little before, sometime before that, I just don't remember because it's like almost 70 years ago. We were sitting at the table with Mr. McGee, and we usually did say a prayer before our dinner, our evening meal, but we just called it the prayer. So this evening, my father looked at me and he said, "Billy, would you like to say grace?" And I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. And to honestly, to this day, I can't be sure of the extent to which it was innocence / ignorance, or on the other hand, just being a wiseacre, because everybody's heads were bowed. That should have been a clue. So with everyone's heads bowed very solemnly, I said very confidently, I said the word grace. And Mr. McGee laughed so hard he almost fell out of his chair. So in case anybody thinks I was, too, I don't know, St. Francis-ish or something like that, I was also a goofy little kid, and I don't have a clue where those questions came from.
That's so nice. This is a really common theme with like all the interviews I heard before, and now that I started doing this myself, it's the reoccurring themes like that the people who end up being serious about the spiritual life, they have clearly these like latent samskars, because like that kind of thing just doesn't come to the mind of a normal kid. And it was really interesting to me that your pastor didn't have the answers, which also shows that like we come to this from this like experiential side, but there's a lot of religion that's only social. That it's just what you do in the world, right? So he hadn't even thought about it, I suppose, although he's a minister, which is kind of surprising to us, but I guess that's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really nice story. I love that Gray story too.
It's the rest of the truth, as they say. Right.
And so was your mother religious at all? So your father was agnostic, but like, did you, I guess you just said that you were the only person in your family who actually went to church.
Regularly. I think mom, I think we might have gone to church like on Christmas Eve or something, sometimes, and maybe Easter. But the thing is, I don't know I can't think of which church my mom and dad would have gone to, because the church I was going to was as a like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grader, was a Presbyterian church that the friends from my new school, my new friends when I moved at the beginning of the 4th grade away from Lompoc to the Los Angeles area, these kids that I made friends with went to a Presbyterian church, and it was within walking distance, so I could go alone. So it's not like a church they would have gone to. So I honestly, and then when we moved to Virginia, for the first year, we lived right next door to a Methodist church. Actually, the home we were renting was being rented from that church. So I could just go over to church and Sunday school, on my own. It's just next door. And then when we moved out of town, out of Arlington, my dad would have to drive me to church. He would either drop me off or he would sit with me.
Do you remember from that early time, like when you started going to church alone, like as early as you can remember, do you remember any like peak experiences in terms of spiritual experience in church, or was it more just like it felt like comfortable and you liked doing it, but it wasn't any like, rolling on the ground in ecstasy or anything like that?
Well, I think if there were a peak experience, it would be one morning when I was walking to church. I don't remember the context. I don't remember what made me think of it, but there was something about, I remember having heard something about asking Jesus into your heart, and some sort of a gesture of surrender. And I asked Jesus into my heart walking to church, to that Presbyterian church one morning, one Sunday morning. I had a valley experience too. And that was in the 6th grade in Sunday school. They started telling us about the Catholic Church and the things that the Catholic Church believed, and Martin Luther's disappointment in the church and all these things. And it really disturbed me, because I had next door neighbors who were Catholic kids who were perfectly cool. And I also remember hearing, I think my 2nd grade girlfriend, my 2nd grade crush was a girl named Susie Romano, who, being from an Italian family, was Catholic. And I remember my parents telling me when I was 7, you'd never be able to marry Susie Romano. And they explained to me that she went to a different church. And I thought, okay, that's weird, but whatever, I'm 7 years old. And so, I was so disturbed by the anti-Catholic rhetoric that I was getting in 6th grade Sunday school that I stopped going to Sunday school. I didn't stop going to church, and I didn't stop participating in the children's choir. But I just couldn't do Sunday school anymore. So I had a peak, maybe a sort of a peak experience and kind of a valley experience. And when I look at that, I realize that sometimes devotees ask me about the how easily I deal with devotees from whatever mission I happen to encounter. And I've had this ecumenical spirit since before I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, I ended up becoming an Episcopalian, because I discovered an Episcopal church, a low church, so it wasn't too exotic for me. A little more like my Methodist and Presbyterian experiences. And the minister, Herb Wilkie, was this is in the very early 60s. This is maybe 62 or probably 62, 61 or 2, where he had a very ecumenical spirit, and he would invite anyone who, I think the way he put it was, believed in or accepted Christ's sacrifice, to come up and take communion, whether they were confirmed in that church, St. James's, or any Episcopal church, or any church at all. Please come. And I found that really appealing. So I ended up being confirmed in the Episcopal church as a teenager.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I immediately, when you were talking about your early experiences, that's what came to me too. Like, you have this aura of being like non-sectarian. It's very much like what I think of, one of the first things I think about when I think about you. And so I was thinking, my understanding is that the Methodist Church is a little more open-minded than a lot of the other Protestant churches. Is that accurate or no?
From what I've seen recently, yeah, it probably is in a lot of ways. I think there's probably a couple of different Methodist denominations, and I remember there being, I think I remember hearing when I first became a devotee that there were 257 Protestant denominations at the time. There's probably 2,570 now. But yeah, they do seem to be open. There seems to be a lot of room for, I guess, what people would call liberal or progressive thought and somewhat ecumenical spirit in what I've seen of the Methodist Church. It's not my great grandfather's Methodist Church, that's for sure.
I see. So I guess we could fast forward a little bit. So you went to the Navy, I guess, in your late teens, and then you were, I think, in the Navy when you met the devotees for the first time. As far as I remember, the story was that you met the devotees in a Jimi Hendrix show, wasn't it? I'd love to hear that whole thing.
Yeah, I was in the Navy. I worked as an intelligence analyst. I was based at the Pacific Fleet Intelligence Center, and I was also in.
So just
I guess a part-time. Oh, go ahead.
Just for a historical reference, that was during the Vietnam War, wasn't it?
Exactly. That was my daily reality. My daily reality was working with part of it was working analyzing aerial reconnaissance photography of what was going on in Southeast Asia, and I was also, I guess you could say, I was engaged in activities that weren't particularly compatible with my very restricted top secret clearance and top secret work. The work I did day to day was mostly secret, not top secret, but there was some top secret stuff. But I had this really restricted clearance. But I was also engaged in part-time, I guess, in what became known then as the counterculture. I mean, I was here in Hawaii. It was the late '60s, and that's what there was. That's what was going on. That was what was interesting. And I was in the process of getting out of the Navy when one of my friends reminded me that there was a Jimi Hendrix concert that night. This was Friday in May of 1969. And so I went to this concert, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience only played a couple of songs, and Jimmy mumbled something into the microphone about the sound system not being able to support his guitar. So he asked for 15 minutes, and he said, "We'll come back in 15 minutes. We'll fiddle with it, and we'll come back in 15 minutes." Well, he didn't come back. And the whole time while we were waiting, this was in an outdoor venue in Kapiolani Park in Honolulu called the Waikiki Shell. And the whole time during the time we were waiting, it was just a bunch of freaks sitting around waiting for Jimi Hendrix. People were playing Frisbee and doing all kinds of stuff. And just outside the exit to the Waikiki Shell, I heard this sound. Sometimes it went faster, sometimes it went more slowly, but it never stopped. And I couldn't figure out what the heck it was until they came a while later and announced that Hendrix wasn't going to perform that night, that we were to come back on Sunday night and he would play then. So as we exited, there was a party of 4 or 5 devotees just outside the exit to the Waikiki Shell, having some kirtan. And we all just gathered around the kirtan party. I mean, we came for an experience, came for the Jimi Hendrix experience. We came for an experience, and Govinda Dasi, Turiyadas, Sudama, and Jayashri gave us an experience. And eventually the crowd grew large enough that we were blocking the exit. So the police made the kirtan party move down into the park. So this is thousands of young people chanting Hare Krishna under a full moon in the spring in Kapiolani Park in Honolulu. It was a pretty magical experience, and it left a strong, really strong impression on me. And out of that crowd, there were 2 people who within a few months moved into the Honolulu temple. My god sister, Krusha, who had maybe was just about to graduate from high school at the time, because I think this was probably early May of '69. She was also there, and that was May, and in February or March, I think of 1970, we both moved into the temple on the same day. So that was a pretty powerful experience for a couple of us. And I've seen people's accounts online of that first night of that Hendrix concert, and they commented on the kirtan, most of them.
Interesting. So did you, like, when you were affected by the kirtan, did you have this, what did it feel like? Because a lot of devotees, when they finally like connect with devotees in this lifetime, they have this sense of like familiarity, and like they kind of know that they are their people. I didn't have that personally, but a lot of people do. But what was your kind of internal experience when that happened?
There were a few levels. One was, one of the questions I saw was, what was it that attracted me? It was the kirtan that immediately attracted me. And it seemed strangely familiar to me. I felt, I know that. And the thing is, I had heard the Maha Mantra before, when our local underground FM radio station would play the soundtrack to Hair. And I think the song is called Love in Hare Krishna or something like that. And I liked a lot of the songs from Hair because they were clever. They were a lot of them were musically interesting, and some of the lyrics a little naughty and defiant as we tended to be back then. And so I liked it, but the one song that stuck with me most was that Hare Krishna. But it didn't seem familiar. It didn't feel like it seemed familiar because of that. And when I reflected later on that, I remember being a boy in the LA area in the late 50s and seeing on a local station, a local cult leader being interviewed on some interview show. This must have been 58, maybe. A guy, and I can't remember the name of his cult, but it was like kind of in the hills right behind the San Fernando Valley where we lived. And his name, what he called himself was Krishna Venta. And when I heard his name, I sat down and listened to the whole interview. And then later, a couple of his ex-followers bombed their compound, drove a truckload of dynamite up and bombed their compound. So he was all over the news in the LA area for a while again. And they replayed that interview, and I watched the whole interview, and I was just blown. There was something about this guy's name being Krishna Venta. I didn't know what the Venta was about, but somehow or other Krishna just, it didn't seem weird. It's, I just wanted whatever Krishna said, I wanted to hear it,
Yeah, I
He
mean,
was weird. The guy was so weird.
Yeah, I'm sure, but it's of course not surprising at all that you'd be attracted to the name, considering that we've spent like many lifetimes chanting over and over again, so yeah, that makes perfect sense that it would catch. I'm interviewing Mayapur next time in a month or two, and he's got a really, really cool story. So stay tuned for that. I'm not going to reveal it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Oh, he's got one of the coolest stories about that kind of thing that I've ever heard. But anyway, a little carrot there for the listeners.
All right. Yeah.
But so you met the devotees and you joined soon after, once you met them for the first time. And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
It was a few months. In the meantime, I did get out of the Navy. I met the devotees in May. I did get out of the Navy in August and came back to Honolulu in maybe mid or late October of 1969. And before I got out, and then after I came back, I would in the evenings go down to Waikiki and chant with the devotees, but on the other side of the street, because that was another layer to my experience. When I first met when I met the devotees at that Hendrix concert, was I was so drawn to the kirtan that I was worried about getting too close. And so I had determined that I was not going to get close enough to one of the devotees to talk to them. So I would chant on the other side of the street.
That's really funny. Ratna Chintamani has a similar thing. Like when she saw the devotees for the first time, she saw them also on the other side of the street, and she knew immediately, like, my life's gonna end if I go, and like those are my people, but my life's gonna end if I like hang out with them. So I cannot go. That so she there was a pretty long stretch of time before she then finally decided, like, okay, I'm going to end my life, basically. So it's interesting. A lot of devotees also have that experience. It's funny how these things repeat with so many devotees, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So then I'd like to, for me, a lot of times the most special stories are always like when you finally meet your guru. And so I'd love to hear about how you met Srila Prabhupada, where that was, and all the essential details about that.
Well, while I was chanting on the other side of the street of the devotees, from the devotees, my friends all knew that I was really interested, but they also knew that I was never going to get close enough to them to really find out what was going on. So my friends would bring home Back to Godhead magazines for me, and I would read the articles, and I found myself being put off a little bit by the articles by Srila Prabhupada being introduced as his divine grace. So this was 1969, so that we were using these titles by then, his divine grace and Prabhupada. And so I thought, what is this, some kind of pope? But I was reading the articles, and to the extent I was able to understand them, I found myself really intrigued. And so when the way the guardrail that I had erected came down was that one Saturday night, probably in December of '69, I turned around to go back to my house, and there was a devotee standing right at my elbow waiting for me. And he invited me to come to the feast the next day, and I said I would come. So when I woke up the next morning, I remembered that I had promised this Krishna monk that I would go to their feast, and I didn't have any experience with monks. And I remember thinking, well, if you tell a monk you're going to do something, maybe you ought to do it. So I thought, okay, so if I'm actually going to do this, I'm actually going to sit down with these people and chant Hare Krishna with them on purpose. I might as well just go clean. I don't even think I smoked a cigarette that day before I went to the feast, much less any cannabis or anything. Just go clean with your heart open. And I often caution people, kids, don't try this at home because it's a little dangerous. With my heart open to the Hare Krishna mantra, and just see what it does. And it did what it did. That, and Turidas showed me Bhagavad Gita as it is, which kind of, just the whole experience of that afternoon. When I went back to my house, I realized that my life was going to be different from then on. I wasn't sure how. I didn't have a clear picture of what my new worldview was, but I knew that I saw everything differently all of a sudden. And, it took me a few weeks, a couple of months of, going out and chanting with the devotees. The nights they went, I think they went out Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and had Bhagavad Gita classes Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So that's what I did in the evenings after that. And then during the day, I found myself, especially if there weren't any waves, I would find myself going up to the temple and helping out around the temple, doing gardening or things like that. And at a certain point, I realized I was spending more time with the Hare Krishna devotees than I was with my friends or in the ocean surfing. So I started actually contemplating moving in to see, try and see what total immersion was like. And so when I did that, it was a little before Gaur Purnima in 1970. I moved into the temple, and I had been reading Srimad Bhagavatam before moving into the temple. And when I read in the Srila Prabhupada's purport to the Bhagavatam's second verse, Srila Prabhupada writes that he's writing about how devotees don't compete for the resources of nature. And he said, so not only do they not compete with others, they strive to, the devotees, the transcendental devotees of the Lord strive to create a competition-less society with God at the center. I read that sentence and it just completely turned my mind inside out. Because I realized at that moment that I had found the revolution we were all looking for. I mean, this is the most revolutionary idea that I had ever encountered. And so I moved into the temple. It was a little rough because I'm a really shy and introverted person. And living in the ashram, you just didn't have any space. So it was a little hard for me sometimes. And in August of 1970, Srila Prabhupada came through, and he came through and stayed overnight, gave one lecture at the temple. And I had already in my heart committed to Srila Prabhupada as his disciple. I had decided that I was going to join this revolution and, and help Srila Prabhupada bring it about. And so we had a kirtan party, probably of 50 people, to greet Srila Prabhupada at the airport when he got in that morning from Los Angeles. And when I saw Srila Prabhupada, my heart pretty much, I mean, I had one of those, your heart leaps out of your chest kind of experiences. And when I actually saw him, when I was actually in the same space as he, I realized that I knew him. I realized that this is who I wasn't like on a big search for a guru. People kept trying to point me toward gurus, and none of them, I didn't find any of them interesting. But when I started reading Bhagavad Gita as it is, and then after that Srimad Bhagavatam, and kept chanting Hare Krishna, I realized that I had, I at least needed to hear from Srila Prabhupada. And then when a little while after I moved into the temple, I realized that this was going to be my life. And so we created a little space in the lobby of the airport to have a little reception for Srila Prabhupada, where all the devotees would offer him a flower garlands. And whenever I went forward to offer my garland to Srila Prabhupada, I was a little hesitant, kind of shy, and someone else would step up. So I ended up being the last person to offer their garland to Srila Prabhupada out here in this big public space in the Honolulu International Airport. And when I got down on the floor to offer my obeisances, I was sobbing so hard I couldn't say the prayers. So I think I kind of had a peak experience there.
Would you say that, because one of my questions was, without knowing this, was like, what has been the most profound, intense spiritual experience in your 50 years of being a devotee? Would this be it, or was there another thing, if you don't mind sharing, that was even more intense?
Well, I would say at least as intense was when I had my cage completely rattled one night in the early 2000s, where I had an encounter with Srila Prabhupada. You could call it a dream because I was in bed and it was the middle of the night. But it wasn't dream-like in that both the sensory and emotional experiences were very lucid, really clear. And this isn't ordinarily, this is the kind of thing that isn't decent to discuss, but I have discussed it publicly on a couple of occasions because people have asked. And it's a way, I think, of glorifying Srila Prabhupada by pointing out that he that he continues to give his mercy even to laggards like me, even to devotees who are like super attached. I mean, I'm kind of like a dyed-in-the-wool family guy, and I found myself in a small, softly lit room alone with Srila Prabhupada, and it was after however many years, maybe 30 years or something, and if there was something in that dream encounter that was anomalous, it was the fact that I'm sitting there grinning, just beaming, just super stoked because wow, I'm with here I am with Srila Prabhupada after all these years. Whereas ordinarily I would have been like I was in the airport. I would have fallen apart in a puddle on the floor. So if there's anything that was out of place in that dream at all, that would be it. I'm sitting there just kind of like grinning, thinking, oh my, and Srila Prabhupada looked great. He was glowing, vibrant, and intense. And so after I offered my obeisances and I sat there for a moment just beaming, he just kind of looked right at me and he said, so what are you doing these days? And the tone was kind of a blend of just checking in and checking me out, looking for an opportunity for a course correction. So I explained to him that, my wife and I lived on the big island of Hawaii, that I taught at the local college, and that we did a lot of service together with the local devotees, and that we had a really strong program of daily sadhana in our home, beginning with worshiping my Thakurjis every day. And then our whole Sunday morning was just deity worship, because we had our own deities besides my Shilas, and then devotees would drop their deities off if they were leaving the island for us to take care of. We had like deity sitting service, I guess, in our little temple room.
Deity daycare, huh?
Deity daycare. So his response, and so I explained to him, that we were doing a lot of service together, and we were very supportive of each other's spiritual progress. And his response was, well, that's nice, but I wanted you to teach this Krishna Consciousness cult. And I started to get a little uneasy feeling about where the conversation was headed. And so I would explain to him, about, my wife and I had been together for so long. We shared so much affection and responsibility. We felt so much affection and responsibility for each other, and that we really, really strongly supported each other in making spiritual progress. And he just kept pushing a little harder at each turn. And at one point he said, oh, wife shouldn't be an impediment. And I said, well, I don't think my wife is an impediment. And I went into my hamana thing. And finally he just looked at me and he said, sometimes sannyas can help. And it was like, oh, the Lord. No, what? Said the S word. And so I went back into my thing again about the mutual affection and responsibility. And then he locked eyes with me, and he just kind of cocked his head and he said, I also had to do. And that I just thought, oh my God, and mate, check and mate. And so, at one point he assured me, he said, she is a good girl. I know her well. Krishna will take care of her. He is quite competent. I have very strong confidence that he will be able to do so. And then he asked me, do you have someone who can help you? And I said, I don't know, with sannyas. And he just waggled his head, yes. And I said, and I started thinking, and whenever I would ask, when I was living in San Diego, if sadhu, some sadhu or sannyasi would visit, I would kind of like feel around like what they thought, I should think about in my future. And everyone was really happy that I had a really strong family life. Everybody thought of us as ideal householders. And our kids did a lot of service, growing up, into their 20s at the temple along with us. And I kind of got like Mr. Rogers responses from them. We like you just the way you are. We think it's really cool that you're really strong. You have a really strong household life, and that you're a professional. You teach at the university. We like that. Everybody likes you just. And so I kind of accepted that. So this dream really took me up. So and I couldn't think of anyone. And then I thought, well, I had been doing editing for Tripurari Maharaj. So I said, I don't know, maybe Tripurari Maharaj. And he just leaned back on his bolster and he said, oh, he is a very good man. He has much to offer. And then he said, so speak with your wife and your children and arrange how to make this happen. And that was it. All of a sudden, I'm sitting in my bed, shaking with tears streaming down my face. I got up, went into my office, wrote the whole thing down in my journal and then didn't tell anybody. A couple of weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later, I got this email from Tripurari Maharaj saying, I've been thinking about, your life as a teacher, your Brahminical nature, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you should start thinking about how you're going to prepare for taking sannyas someday. And that just completely freaked me out. And I couldn't respond. I just like, oh, what the heck? Because as I'm writing in my journal that night, I'm reflecting on Srila Prabhupada's talk on the occasion of Bhakti Pragyan Keshava Maharaj's passing, where he shared with the devotees the dreams that he had with Bhakti Siddhanta. And his response was, I was a little horrified. And I remember hearing that hearing that talk in 1970 on tape, and you could hear in his voice, there was no hyperbole there. There was no joking there at all. He was a little horrified. And actually, Nanda Kumar, who had spent considerable time as Prabhupada's personal attendant in the early 70s, told me that Prabhupada told Nanda Kumar once, after he took sannyas and realized what he had done, he said, I was horrified. So as I'm writing this in my journal, I'm reflecting on that, and I'm thinking, I get it. So eventually I wrote him, he wrote me about 10 days later and said, pardon me if I was a little forward. But I just, it just seemed to me like it was something worth bringing up. And I said, well, no, I haven't responded because I think you're probably right. And I'll tell you why sometime when I'm ready. So that's how, that was another really profound experience with Srila Prabhupada.
That's incredible. I never heard that part that Guru Maharaj contacted you just like less than 2 weeks or 2 weeks after this happened. But I've seen these kind of things being around Guru Maharaj and being around other sadhus and stuff. Like, this stuff is real. Like, there are these real connections, that it's a real thing, right? And it's just like, obviously, something like that cannot be a coincidence that Guru Maharaj out of the blue to suggest that you take sannyas after Prabhupada appeared to you.
Mentioned him in the dream.
Right.
Said, oh, yeah, he has so much to offer.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I love these stories. I'd love to hear these stories. I didn't actually know that you were doing editing for Guru Maharaj before this all happened. Like, what were you working on back then?
In 99, he sent me the manuscript for Bhagavad Gita. He actually mailed me, I guess it was in 99, because I think it was in 99 that I met him again after like 20 odd years of not having seen him. And Vicharu and Chittahari came down to San Diego, I guess, to see some devotees cow project. And I drove out and spent the afternoon speaking with him, and then invited, and then he mentioned that he was going to come to the temple the next day, which was really awkward because that was the day I give Bhagavatam class, and it just felt really awkward, me giving class with him sitting there right in front of me. But where was I?
I was just asking what you were working on. So it was the Gita. That's how you read.
Oh yeah, it was the Gita first, and I also helped with the Shikshastakam editing. I don't remember if that was before or I think that might have been after the dream. I can't remember.
Yeah, Shikshastakam came out in 2005, so it was about 5 years after the
Oh
Gita.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was probably right around then. And I guess I thought of him because I had what I considered to be a service relationship with him. And I thought, well, he would be the one person who might not give me Mr. Rogers' answer, if I were to ask him what my future is supposed to look like.
Sure enough, it didn't.
He volunteered it, as he's wont to do.
I always like to hear stories from Prabhupada disciples of how they met Guru Maharaj for the first time. And so I know you served in New Dwarka in Los Angeles, but could you tell us how you met Guru Maharaj for the first time? And after that, what kind of encounters did you have with him, stuff like that?
Sure. In probably January of 73, I had come to the conclusion, along with my temple president in GBC, Gaur Sundar, who just passed away a few weeks ago, that brahmachari life wasn't sustainable for me, and that I needed to get married. And he had kind of surveyed, kind of like checked out the women devotees in Hawaii, a couple of whom lived in Honolulu, most of whom lived at a ladies' temple out in the country on the island of Kauai. And he didn't think any of them would be suitable for me. So he suggested that I go to Los Angeles or San Diego and see if I could meet someone and then come back. And then he changed his mind. He said, well, actually, Prabhupada has made me GBC for South America along with Hawaii. And I was just wondering if you ever thought about preaching in Peru, or if you ever thought about going to Peru. And I said, well, when I was in high school, I was so fascinated by stuff I heard about the Inca civilization that I thought after I graduated from college, it would be cool to be part of Peace Corps or Alliance for Progress and work in Peru and kind of like do what I could to explore the mysticism of the Inca or something. And so we decided that I would go to LA, see if I could find a wife, and then go to South America. So the very first brahmachari I met when I got to New Dwarka was really sweet but super eccentric devotee, and he asked me, "Do you like Sankirtan?" And I said, "Well, I've been part of this movement for over about 3 years, and a little over 3 years now. I guess you'd have to say yes, because that's what we did back then. Or at least in Honolulu, we went out on the streets 6 to 10 hours a day, chanting and distributing magazines and books, and that's what I thought of as Sankirtan, what Prabhupada sometimes called street Sankirtan. So I said, "Yeah, I guess I do." And he says, "You like Sankirtan? You should find Tripurari." This is very early 73, and he was always quite famous as the guy to talk to about Sankirtan, which there meant book distribution by that time, because he had been instrumental. He and a couple of other devotees had been instrumental in really moving lots of Srila Prabhupada's books on the streets, in the malls, in the airport, and all these different places. And as it turned out, I had a locker up in the Brahmachari ashram right next to Tripurari's. And for a long time, because I wasn't a book distributor and I was really only there to kind of get myself ready to go to South America, I wasn't because he was so focused on his sadhana, his study, and his service. And he spent so much of his energy back at the temple dealing with the devotees who were book distributors. I had no clue whether he knew who I was even. Until one day, one of the leaders approached me and started ripping me for not doing enough temple stuff and making excuses about getting ready to go to South America to do other things. And Tripurari, who, I was moving into family life, and he was just moving out of family life because, he had been married for a while, had a child, but his life was really being changed by his circumstances, which largely included his dedication to his service. But even though I had no clue who he was, he turned around, walked up, and he knew Rameshwara would listen to him because he was hadn't been yet declared by Srila Prabhupada as the incarnation of book distribution, but everybody looked up to him. And he looked over, he went to Rameshwara, this leader, and he said, Prabhu, here's what you're not considering. He's going to South America to prepare things so some of us can come down there and distribute Srila Prabhupada's books. And I saw right then that he had a much broader vision of the Krishna Consciousness movement than I had given him credit to in the few weeks that I had known him. And I recalled that later when it must have been, maybe almost 26 years later when he came to San Diego on that visit. So that was my, kind of like when I first actually kind of like had an encounter with him.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like Guru March.
Yeah.
Let's see my questions here. Oh yeah, so I guess we could jump. I want to kind of fast forward again to the time when you started. So you decided to take sannyas, and then you started basically transitioning out of your family life. And I remember you came to Audarya for the first time. It must have been 2006, but you just came for like maybe a day visit or something at first. Wasn't that the case? And then after that, maybe a year after that, you started coming more and more. You actually started to like do the transition. So I would love to hear more like what that was like. And just if you could kind of tell us about that transition.
Sure. My former wife and I and our daughters, my wife and I had come to California. It must have been Christmas time. So that it might have been like Christmas 2005 or around, because we went back, I think, on New Year's Day from that trip. Anyway, I think so. So we would come to the mainland at Christmas time to spend time with our daughters and my stepfather. My mom had already passed away, but we would still visit my stepfather at Christmas time when we could, because it's something we had done the whole time we lived in California, starting in the, I guess, mid 80s or something. And we, as part of that visit, we drove up to Palo Alto to visit my sister, who was dying of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and her husband. And they loaned me their car to drive up to Audarya. And because they had other stuff they wanted to do, that my wife and kids weren't interested in spending those hours in a car just to go up and see some cows while I, met some Swami in the forest. So they went and did tourist stuff around San Francisco, and I drove up to Audarya and had lunch with Guru Maharaj and the devotees, and found out how affectionate some of those cows were. I remember my whole forearm became got groomed by, I can't remember just who it was, but I realized, wow, their tongues are not only really rough but really long. Because she just kind of like wrapped her tongue. I gave her a couple of cow cookies, and she just wrapped her tongue around my arm and just like covered the whole arm in cow nectar. So yeah, that was my first visit to Audarya.
And then you came when you started kind of like to move in. That was that must have been 2007, because I remember Mayapur was here and we were building the temple, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it was just the three. It was just the three of us. Maharaj, Vrindaranya, Chittahari were at Madhuban.
yeah, that was the first year of Madhuvan. Yep.
Yeah, so it must have been like this. It was December. Must have been 2000,
And 6, yeah.
2006, 2007. Yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
mean
So
that,
I was the pujari and cook, so that you and Mayapur could build the temple.
yeah, yeah. But that must have been really intense, because you said you were like a die-in-the-wool family man, and so then you have to start doing this transition. I mean, oh, yeah, that must have been really rough.
Oh, it was even better than that. It was the dead of winter. I had never been at that high a latitude during the winter. I think the northernmost place I had lived during the winter was Washington, D.C. area when I was a teenager. And that's kind of the South. You know, that's kind of like the beginning of the South, Northern Virginia. So it was long, very dark days. There was no sunshine. It was cold and gray and wet sometimes. And as we were driving from Santa Rosa, you and I were driving from Santa Rosa up to Audarya after you picked me up that day. I took the bus from San Francisco airport to Santa Rosa. Then we stopped at REI, I think, to get me a sleeping bag. And as we were driving up, you mentioned that Guru Maharaj wants us to keep the heaters turned off at night when we're sleeping. So I had these long dark nights and short, short gray cold days. And I'd wake up some mornings and I'd look at the thermometer on my alarm clock, and it was like 34 degrees in the yurt. And then I'd walk up to the bathhouse from, what was that, yurt number 5. At least it wasn't number 6. And which was a good workout, kept me young. But yeah, that was a really interesting visit, and I think I'd committed myself to 6 weeks, and I did it. Meanwhile, Maharaj would call from Costa Rica, and and then you'd pass the phone to me, and he'd rub it in. Yeah, it's 85 degrees here. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I joined Audarya a couple of years earlier, and like I'm from Finland, right? And still, like those nights in the year, I mean, it got below freezing a lot of times, and I would go to bed with my toes like so frozen that they were like numb. I couldn't feel them at all, and I wake up and it was the same thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's and then of course taking a bath in the bathhouse when it's not heated up and it's like stone floor stuff. It's another form of fun austerities. So I can imagine if you come from this like comfortable householder situation in Southern California or Hawaii, and then you go straight to that, it's like kind of like a trial by fire. But so okay, so you had that experience, and I'm sure it was challenging, but what was it like then when you finally actually moved out of your home, and like what was that like?
When I left, or what was supposed to be the last time, what we intended to be the last time, I went down to Madhuvan, flew from Florida down to Madhuvan, and I remember having heard a story that Maharaj sent me. Well, Marsh sent me an email from a godbrother who had, I guess on Gaur Purnima, entered the room where he was. He had taken shelter of Narayan Maharaj after sometime during the 90s, and was given sannyas by Narayan Maharaj kind of by surprise. He entered the room, and Premananda Prabhu walked up to him, took him by the hand, and sat him down and next to a pile of saffron cloth and a newly wrapped danda. This is the way the email presented it. It's like he walked into the room and found out he was going to. I mean, there must have been some discussions beforehand, and so I just thought, oh my God, and the delight with which Maharaj sent me that email had me wondering, oh my God, is the bridge going to be burned by, am I going to wake up one morning, show up at Mangalarti and have that bridge burned, by surprise, And so I ended up going back home for a few months, and whatever year, must have been 2011. I went back for a few months after Gaur Purnima. We came back up to California for Gaur Purnima at Audarya, and I went back to Florida until Janmashtami. So it was 5 or 6 months, but that was it. And so I spent some time at Audarya, and I would go back and forth at first between Audarya and Madhurban, which was, really nice. I like the atmosphere in both places. I like the devotees in both places. I do remember that first visit to Madhurban. It was just you, Mayapur, and me. And it was during the rainy season. And every morning, as soon as Mangalarti was over, just as the sun was starting to come up, you and Mayapur would load up, hike down to the inlet to see what the heck you had to fix today. And, again, I was the cook and Pujari so that you and Mayapur could do the hard stuff. And then Mayapur went to Poland for a couple, 3 weeks. And that was when Gaur-Sundar came.
Yep.
It was Gaur-Sundar who has been there ever since.
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah. Those were the toughest 4 months of my life. I don't think I'm going to overdo that. But yeah, were you there when we had that mudslide and the whole...
I was.
Okay. Yeah.
That happened. It happened just after Mayapur. No, it happened just before Gaur-Sundar left in Mayapur. And I remember you, Gaur-Sundar, and I on Saturday morning after that rain, and the rain was really something. The path to the temple was like this rushing stream. It was just, God, it was so crazy. And we were thinking, okay, after all that, we got to get it, we have some errands we need to do in Nicoya. And, we were thinking, first thing we were thinking was the internet cafe, just so that we could just be in touch with the rest of the world all of a sudden, just a little bit. And we're driving down the road, and there's this wall. It must have been 6.5 or 7 feet tall. And what was it? Maybe 35 feet wide. Across the whole hill had just slid across the road. And I remember, of course, I'll clean it up a little bit. As we saw that wall of mud, and Gaur-Sundar said, "We are so screwed," but a little more R-rated. It was like, oh my God. So we drove back up, put our grubby clothes back on again, grabbed some shovels and started shoveling. And we shoveled, I think, for a couple of days until Juan got a day off work and came up on his horse to see how we were. And I remember him riding up over the mound, mound, and he asked about the wires and everything, and he went back and he took care of having the guy come in with a bulldozer and clear. I mean, it would have taken us a couple of weeks, I think, to clear that by hand.
Yeah, I remember the first day we dug. Just a little clarification for the listeners. What happened was there was such intense rains that the whole bank from behind there's this like slope, and the rain brought down this whole bank of like huge boulders, like whole trees with their roots and everything, just like slid it down from the bank to the driveway or the road that was our only access road to get out of Madhuban. And so we tried digging ourselves out, but I remember we dug like 8 hours straight, and it was extremely hard work because the mud was so heavy from the rain that
and
like,
very clayey
and clingy, right? Too, like it would.
So it's stuck to the shovels.
Yeah, and our shoes had these like 6-inch cakes at the bottom, and so we did it for like 8 hours straight, and we got about 4 feet ahead out of the 35 feet or 40 feet, or whatever the whole length was. I mean, it was just insane, absolutely insane. But yeah, that's pioneering for you, I guess. I guess going back to sannyas. So then you took sannyas in 2012, and I guess what I'm really interested in. So I think I'm going to end with this because I could go on for another hour, but we try to keep this roughly in like hour 15 minutes. So I'll end with this. But what I'm really interested in is nowadays there's kind of a lot of talk in certain circles, in the international Gaudiya circles, about how sannyas is not relevant anymore. So I'd like to hear from you, from the horse's mouth, like what is the relevance of sannyas right now, like in this day and age? Like say like Bhaktivinoda, he was actually emphasizing that people should just stay as householders in the Kali Yuga, but then Bhaktisiddhanta and Srila Prabhupada had this very strong push for sannyas. And it seems like now there's some like blowback against that in a lot of ways. But so I'd love to hear from you, like, what do you think is the relevance of sannyas in the international Gaudiya circles?
I think that the relevance of the sannyas ashram nowadays is that there are people who are kind of like emblems of complete dedication to sadhana and outreach in different ways. And that was how Srila Prabhupada saw it. I think when he started giving devotees sannyas, he wanted people who would kind of step up, do maybe do outlandish things. Although the first devotees he sent actually abroad was 3 householder couples to England in 68. So and here to Hawaii, he sent a householder here as well. But he, someone who would be a kind of be a signpost for that dedication. I mean, the essence of sannyas, a couple of things that Prabhupada says. One, he said, the essence of sannyas is teaching bhakti yoga, teaching Krishna consciousness. But he's also made it really clear when he talked about the Tridandi sannyas, and that is that the actual symptoms of sannyas are dedication of kaya, mana, and bhak to kaya, mana, and bhakya to the service of Mukunda, as we see in that verse from the Etan sa astaya paratmanishtam verse from the Avanti Brahmana. Srila Prabhupada had when he gave sannyas on the couple of occasions that I was aware of, that I've either personally experienced or seen transcripts of the sessions, he had them chant that verse 3 times, had them chant the Sanskrit verse 3 times, read the translation, and then his Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila chapter 3 purport. And this was, starting year, maybe 3 years or so before Chaitanya Charitamrita was published. I remember he had Sudama read that in 1972 when he gave him sannyas in Tokyo. So that dedication of our bodies, our minds, and our speech, which are symbolized by the 3 rods tied together, with the 4th rod, which symbolizes the dedication of our very selves, the jiva. to the service of Mukunda, who is Lord Krishna. So the sannyasis kind of serve as, as emblems of that complete dedication, which is why I guess they're afforded the deference they are. And it's people who are free. This is one of the things I saw when my friend Siddha Swarupananda took sannyas here in Hawaii in 1972. I remember noticing him at Mangalarti, that just just the mornings right after he took sannyas, and in the kirtan, he all of a sudden he just looked even freer than he was before. So we give up one of the things that we accept on sannyas. We accept a kopan, we accept a danda, we accept achyuta gotra. We accept that we don't have any family other than Krishna's. We're 100% part of Krishna's family. So that means we don't belong to the small, narrow family that we might be accustomed to identifying with, so that we can belong to everybody. So the sannyasis are free to go where they're needed and do what's necessary. And we may not all be like hard charging, extroverted kind of folks. I know that in a lot of ways I'm not exactly standard issue sannyasi, I guess. Only a couple of us who had long, happy, successful Krishna conscious marriages and went on to take sannyas. And for me, what I began to see as I was being drawn out of my family life was that although there wasn't anything wrong with my spiritual life at that point, perhaps I was a little more comfortable than was necessary. We had a very strong sadhana program. We did a lot of, we associated a lot with the local devotees. They were all our friends and neighbors. And we did programs together at least every week. And we felt like we were making some progress in our spiritual life, slow as it may be. And we really supported each other in that growth. But maybe I was just a little too comfortable with my little house out in the country on the Big Island. And so I got pulled out of my comfort zone. So I think that to the extent that there's some relevance, that sannyasis can be useful like that. I also think, of course, maybe it's just me, but one of the things people seem to appreciate about me is my accessibility. And my accessibility, I guess, in a number of ways. I have a really hard time what sometimes feels to me like putting on airs, trying to act so completely aloof from everything and everyone that that they can't, people can't relate to me. I'm easy. It turns out once you get past my shyness, I'm easy to talk to. I'm often a pretty good listener, and I like hearing other devotees. I like hearing other devotees' stories as well. So sannyasis. We need. There's a certain decorum that we need to observe, but I think it's really good that we can be actual, genuine human beings to the extent that it's possible. Each of us has a completely different character, completely different personality. So we're going to have a great variety even among sannyasis. So even though we have this decorum, I think it's really good that we also find ourselves comfortable with other people. And be, letting other people share themselves with us, and sharing ourselves with them. When we see that admonition from Lord Chaitanya, we also need to consider the context. All of the scripture that he's citing says, no, that in Kali Yuga people shouldn't eat cows and shouldn't take sannyas. The context is that Lord Chaitanya was castigating the Kazi for being a meat eater and imposing some sort of religious stricture on, some so-called, religious stricture on the Sankirtan movement. And the point that he was making was, how can you talk about religion when you regularly eat cows? He wasn't, he gave that admonition. He used that verse as part of his admonition of the Kazi, castigating the Kazi. And then he went and took sannyas a couple of years later. So I don't know, what are you going to do?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I like that. So there's a couple questions, at least one question from Shraddha. Shraddha, do you want me to read your question, or do you want to ask it yourself? I guess your internet's been a little weak, so it might have a problem. If you want to ask it yourself, we can try that out.
Hare Krishna.
I don't know if you can hear, just a general kind of question, just curious, if you're drawn to certain leelas or certain pastimes or certain moves within Leela, within Krishna Leela, whatever. I was just wondering what you were drawn to, whether in the early days or now, and why.
Shraddha, I think it's too hard to
understand that.
out.
Yeah, I didn't hear enough of that to understand what the questions were.
I have the question here.
Okay.
Here, okay. So I have the question here. She sent it to me. Okay, so Shraddha asks, I would like to know if you have a specific empathy or attraction for a certain lila within either Gaura or Krishna lila that you feel drawn to, or have felt that drawing in the past, and why? Sometimes devotees have an affinity for a certain lila or mood within a certain lila, and it would be interesting to hear this from you.
Sounds like a personal question. Well, I find myself, I have long found myself particularly drawn to, well, one particular Leela that I like the Damodar, I like Krishna's Damodar Leela, but I also really like a lot about the Govardhan Leela. It's such a wonderful Leela with so many lessons and a lot of fun, I think, in it as well. I like, in the 10th canto, I like the chapter on the Aghasura Leela, chapter 12, because it opens up with this picture, this really wonderful, kind of almost cinematic picture. Shukadev Goswami explaining to King Parikshit how Krishna and the cowherd boys would hang around and they're just messing around in the forest while the cows are grazing. Maybe it's the calves at this point still. And, all that, country bumpkin kid stuff that they were doing out in the forest, chasing birds' shadows on the ground, and harassing climbing trees and harassing the monkeys, and shouting bad words down wells and cracking up when the echo would come back, and all that kind of stuff. And then Shukadev says, as if in astonishment, what kind of punya, what kind of pious activities could possibly account for these country kids to have the absolute truth, whom the Gyanis see as Brahman, and nobody else can really understand. They're just going to see him as an ordinary person. as their personal friend, just as Lord Brahma is amazed later, aho bhagyam, aho bhagyam. This is one of my favorite verses, itam satam brahma sukhana bhutya. And then he shifts into the Aghasura Lila after that. So I like the Aghasura Lila partly because of that. Also, I like the cowherd boys just like shrugging the shoulders and say, well, giant python cave, whatever, let's check it out. If something goes south, Krishna will help us out. He always does. So they just kind of like march in. And I always loved that one Atma Samarpana song that Tripurari Maharaj Ki Jai. That Bhakti Vinod Thakur wrote in his Sharanagati. And that a couple of lines have this picture of the cowherd boys confidently marching into the mouth of Aghasura. And I always just like the picture that paints. Whenever Agni would sing that song, I would just it would make me happy. Yeah, what's my favorite Leela? What's my favorite Leela in Gaura Leela? It actually became taking sannyas, because I remember when, especially that first time I went to Audarya, as I was cooking lunch, I would be listening to, what's that devotee's name who has the audio of Chaitanya Bhagavat? Damodar. I would hear that over and over again. And then I would get to the part where the Ashirvad comes. Anyone who hears this Leela with attention, will have all their attachment to family life destroyed. And, I'd get to that part and I would think, well, that's supposed to be why I'm listening to it. But it's hard to hear that every time I get to the end of that Leela. But it's such a, it's such a rich Leela, like Krishna leaving Vrindavan with the Kurura. Such a mix of emotions among the devotees.
Thank you. Guru Marsh is saying Jai in the background. I had a bunch of questions from Gokul Chandra, and I kind of integrated some of them to the actual interview, but I wanted to, one question I wanted to pull out from here. And it is, what in your experience are the most important qualities we should try to develop as practitioners of Krishna Bhakti?
In his Upadeshamrita, Rupa Goswami mentions 6 qualities that are particularly helpful for the culture of bhakti. And I like to point out the first 3 especially: enthusiasm, determination or steadiness, and patience. Because we see, devotees, we see that enthusiasm a lot of times, and it comes out, it turns out sometimes to be utsahamayi, this kind of like unwarranted, confident enthusiasm, and we think that we've actually gone a long way, but maybe not as far as we might think we have, because all of a sudden we realize it's Friday night and I'm not at a club or something like that. I'm sitting with devotees, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam or Chaitanya Charitamrita. I must be we used to call it the pure devotee syndrome. But enough enthusiasm that we push even when it's hard, and determination. But also we need patience, because as Tripurari Maharaj has pointed out so many times, not all the flowers in the garden, fortunately, not all the flowers in the garden bloom at the same time. And each of us is, on our own path. And to the extent that we persist in our practice, each of us will grow at a particular rate. And sometimes that gets kicked into overdrive by fortunate circumstances, good association, or maybe apparently unfortunate circumstances like my losing my position at the university, or Srila Prabhupada's business failing, or whatever, we find ourselves in a situation where it gets kicked into fifth gear, and I guess we have sixth gear on some cars nowadays. But I think really important things to keep in mind are enthusiasm, steadiness, and patience. I've never been a star. I've maybe occasionally been a little prominent in very small circles, largely because of my longevity. But if I have any assets at all, it's that I've just never given up. In going on 54 years, even when things seem to be moving really slowly, I still get up. I still take refuge in my japa, in the association of devotees, and Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita. I just keep doing it every day. And as the Taoists say, tiny drops of water wear away the stone. So something's happening to this stone that passes from my heart, and that's by the grace of the devotees.
Thank you. That's beautiful. A great way to end, I think. Basically, perseverance, right? Perseverance and sincerity. That's beautiful.
I would say, I think sincerity is, well, Srila Sridhar Maharaj says that sincerity is invincible. And I've seen that in some new devotees that I've been working with the last 3 years. So in one devotee, this really fierce sincerity to become Krishna conscious no matter what. That's really important. And being open to receiving grace, being open to accepting affection from devotees, devotees worthy of our taking their shelter, and as well of devotees who find our shelter helpful, who see something in us. That's a lesson that I've been learning, especially as a sannyasi, just to somehow or other to gracefully accept the devotees' expressions of affection and respect, so that they don't feel uncomfortable around me.
Thank you so much, Marsh. This was a fantastic chat.
Oh, thank you. My second favorite subject.
What's their favorite subject? Surfing? I'm just kidding.
Oh no, my favorite subject, actually, I think my favorite subject is now Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna and Balaram. But at least my second favorite subject is me. Well, not me so much as the journey that Srila Prabhupada and the devotees have brought me on over the last 50 odd years.
Yeah, so we should probably, I think we should have another chat again, because there's so much to go through. Like I had a bunch
of
that never came.
Okay.
But this is, I really love that format. I don't know, I mean, this format, I really enjoy doing these interviews. So I would like to have you come on again at some point. And I guess with that, we'll let you go to your duties. I got to meet also Muralidhar for some painting jobs. So
nice.
Meet again soon, hopefully.